last few videos, we've been looking at some of the major fires in Port Huron, and today we'd like to look at a couple that occurred in South Park, both occurring at the same location, decades apart, two different companies. That location is right here. Looking down from Google Maps satellite, we can see now it's occupied by Michigan Petroleum Technologies. This is located on Moak Street between 32nd and 28th Street. But this is what used to be there. This is the Wilson Saw Company, a very large factory, and actually it ended up being larger than this because they added two more stories and it ended up being a three-story factory. That would be Moak Street in the foreground, in front of the building, and behind there you can see some railroad tracks, and that was used to transport the goods across the country. The downside of this factory is, for the most part, it was made out of wood, highly flammable. On May 31st, 1912, this was on the front page of the Times Herald. Fire does $150,000 damage at plant of Wilson Saw Company. Of course, $150,000 is close to $4 million today. And really, this could have read, Fire destroys plant of Wilson Saw Company, because that's what it did. It was completely destroyed. In the article, it says the building was burned to the ground, and of which nothing remains now but ashes and smoldering ruins. It was an old wooden structure. It had been in use by the Wilson Company, which concerns manufactures all kinds of woodworking saws, for the past 10 years. Previous to that time, it was occupied by the Port Huron Steel and Screw Company. As a result of this fire, between 120 and 140 men will be thrown out of work temporarily. Well, it turns out it wasn't temporarily, it was permanent. The plant was never rebuilt. I thought this last paragraph was kind of interesting. It says this: while the South Park fire teams were at the fire at the plant of the Wilson Saw Manufacturing Company, an alarm came in from the home of Martin Whitich at the Compo. It was decided at police headquarters that the firemen from engine house number 1 and hose house number 2 could not be sent out, as this action would leave the city unprotected. The home at the Compo, which was only recently constructed, was totally destroyed. I don't quite understand this. They could have sent number 1, which was 7th Street, out to South Park. It's not like it was on the other side of the world. They had a fire in Port Huron, they could have came back. But who am I to say? The property sat vacant for a few years. Then about 1918, a company by the name of Great Lakes Foundry built a factory there at the same location. We don't have a photograph of what this factory looked like before the fire, but we do have a photograph of what it looked like during the fire and after the fire, thanks to the Port Huron Times Herald. That's because on July 8, 1936, the foundry was destroyed by fire, and the Times Herald supplied photographs. The headline was "Spectacular Fire Razes Foundry. Windswept blaze perils many houses. Intense heat, low water pressure, handicapped firemen, one slightly injured." And they show two pictures on the front page. The caption on these read, "Less than an hour after a fire broke out Tuesday afternoon in the sand sheds, the Great Lakes Foundry Company plant in South Park was nothing more than a few burning embers and bare brick walls." Two views above were taken 40 minutes after the $150,000 blaze swept the plant, which hasn't been in use for several years. The entire factory and residential district in South Park was imperiled by burning embers, which were carried 2 blocks distance by a brisk south wind. I think it's ironic that both plants were destroyed with $150,000 worth of damage. Of course, back then, during the first one, it was almost $4 million, and in 1936, it was less than $3 million, so that's inflation for you. There was another photograph inside that same paper that showed the plant after the fire and what was left of it. The caption on this photograph reads, "The separator house and charred embers are all that remained of the $150,000 Great Lakes Foundry plant, which was swept by fire Tuesday afternoon in one of the most spectacular blazes in recent years." All right, I want to look at a couple more fires that happened in the city. The first one here on the corner of Water Street and 7th. That's 7th that you see going over to the right and up, the sidewalk alongside of it. And to the left of the sidewalk, that patch of green grass. There used to be a grocery store there for over 100 years. At the time of the fire, it was the Smith Brother grocery store, but originally it was the fish grocery store. And we covered this grocery store in video number 135, so I don't want to repeat myself, but I gave more detail about the store and the signage and everything in that video, so you might want to go back and look at that. The fire occurred in 1961, and this store still had wooden steps and a wooden porch in front of it, the last they had any wood steps in the city of Port Huron. So I'm surprised that they still had that as late as 1961. I imagine there was a lot of wood in that building. It went up pretty fast. The porch was only 1 or 2 steps high, but it was certainly unique to still have that in 1961. Here's another photograph of the 7th Street side of the store. Not a real good photograph, but certainly historical. You can see the time period when that store was there. It still had the horse and buggy right alongside of it. And you can see the porch a little bit, but not real well. You can see the porch real well in this photograph, and it shows all his produce out there ready to sell. And the fellow there is the owner, Amelia Fish, and the female there is one of his clerks. This was the front page of the Times Herald on February 7, 1961. Fire ruins century-old store. Rosary at 7th and Water destroyed. As we zoom in here to the photograph, you can see the store on fire. A crowd going around it. Eventually, the crowd got to be 1,000 people watching that fire. It was a very cold night, 21 degrees, and the firemen were all covered with ice because of the water spray. And you can see the firemen spraying the hoses here. And as on the right side, you can see this is a very long store. It wasn't very wide, but it was quite long. And almost at the very end, you can see a fireman going up to the 2nd floor on a ladder. I found this picture later on that hasn't been cropped, and actually it's not the same photograph, but it looks like the same photograph. And you can see it's a wider angle now. You can see the Federal Building in the background with the lights on the top floor. You can see the crowd on the right-hand corner. And that fireman that was on the ladder looks like he's at the top of the ladder now. And here we see the aftermath. You can see a crane tearing down the rest of the building. Who would have thought all that happened on this corner? Well, we don't have to go very far to look at our next fire. We just have to go across the street to the southwest corner of Lapeer and 7th Street. And this parking lot once housed a very large building, a very prominent building at one time. The fire was September 5th, 1958. And you can see in this photograph that it was a large 3-story building. It says downtown building burns, flames sweep 3-story unit at 7th and Lapeer. Salvation Army store ruined, other concerns hit. Now those other concerns were a couple other businesses. One was Lum Hong's restaurant, and the other one was Fred's Tavern. As we look at this photograph, it's not very clear, but it gives you some idea of the building. If you look at the very top, that roof line, you can see it's quite decorative. And at one time, like I said, it had a very prominent building, and that was the Metropole Hotel, which you can see in this photograph here. This was taken, about 1900. And I covered this hotel in video number 136, so if you want to know more about it, you can go back there. But it was a wonderful hotel for that era. It even included a bowling alley. And you can see here it also included the Standard Novelty Company that was housed there as well. In this photograph showing the demolition of the building, you can see the Chop Suey restaurant quite plainly on the right-hand side. And as we scan over here to the left, you can see that the fire department didn't have very far to go to get to the fire. That building with the tower on top of it is fire station number 1. So you would think the fire could be put out quite quickly, but that wasn't the case. It was a case of arson. The fire was set in 3 different places in the building, and so the fires quickly engulfed the complete building. In the next day's paper, the headline says, "Fire probe uncovers arson. Officers say blaze started in 3 places. Investigators check ruins of 3-story building." The other story in this newspaper is about these 2 women here that you see in the photograph. Mrs. Fred Merchant on the left and Mrs. Percy Sweet on the right. These 2 ladies were friends with Mrs. Sweet having an apartment in the building, and Mrs. Merchant, along with her husband, owning Fred's Tavern. The article says quick thinking by Mrs. Helen Merchant enabled Mrs. Percy Sweet to flee from her smoke-filled apartment in the Salvation Army store fire Friday. Fire and smoke approached Mrs. Sweet's flat as she slept. Mrs. Merchant, who with her husband, Fred Merchant, owns Fred's Tavern at 708 Lapeer, said she left the tavern about 2:30 a.m. had just climbed into bed when the phone rang. It was a waitress from the tavern, calling to say that the building was burning and that she had better come down. The waitress was just going home after closing up the tavern, Mrs. Merchant said. "I awakened my husband and we left for town. When we reached the scene of the fire, the building was in flames and the firemen were busy trying to get the blaze under control. At first, I didn't know whether or not Mrs. Sweet was out of the building or not. The door at the front entrance of her building was closed. The smoke was beginning to move in all around the building. Rushing up the stairs, I pounded on the door that leads into Mrs. Sweet's apartment. With the smoke getting thicker, I pounded and yelled, 'Is there anybody in there?' Just then, Mrs. Sweet opened the door. She was dressed in her nightclothes and stared at me in amazement. 'The building is burning,' I said. 'Hurry, we have to get out of here.' 'Help me find my clothes,' Mrs. Sweet said. The 2 ran into the apartment. Mrs. Sweet put on her robe, grabbed her purse, and both of the women fled down the stairs and through the smoke-filled hallway. When we had reached the street, the roof of Mrs. Sweet's apartment was in flames. I never would have made it if it hadn't been for Mrs. Merchant,' Mrs. Sweet said. 'By the time someone could have found me, I probably would have been overcome by smoke.' 2 corners, 2 fires, 2 buildings destroyed. A change in the landscape, and the city moves on. I guess that's progress. And I think we've had enough of fires for a while. We've looked at fires in the last few videos. So we'll go on to something new in our next video, but I want to close out this video by something I found in the Times-Herald archives from 1921. And that week, every day, they would feature a new firehouse for 4 days. And I thought this was interesting, so I thought you might enjoy it as well, and I'll close the video off with this. Men and machines that protect city from fire. Station number 1, Downtown Apparatus and Department Center. This was a firehouse on 7th Street that was right next to the old Metropole Hotel. In fact, on the right-hand side, you can see the wall, the back wall of the Metropole Hotel. The next firehouse that was featured was Firehouse number 2, which was on Broad Street, which is now McMorran. And it was between the old Port Huron High School Gymnasium and the courthouse that was on Huron Avenue. It says Fire Station number 2 boasts newest ladder truck in city. Also, old-timer, motorized. They were comparing the two fire vehicles out in front of the firehouse. The truck at the right is the newest acquisition of the department. It is a LaFrance ladder truck with a 75-foot aerial ladder besides smaller scaling ladders. At the left is a rebuilt combination hose and chemical truck. The rear section of it was formerly a part of a horse-drawn vehicle and is 20 years old. It was motorized by removing the front wheels and attaching a special Seagraves fire tractor. The following day they featured Fire Station Number 3. Men and machine at Fire Station Number 3. Protect northern part of the city from fire. This station answered all the calls at the north end of the city and on the main streets as far south as Park Street. Park Street is just before you get to the City Hall. But when there was general alarms and big fires, they responded as well. Firehouse number 3 was located on State Street, right across from Peerless Mint. And last but not least, we have Firehouse number 4. This was located in South Park on 24th Street. South Park safeguarded by Station number 4. Truck and 4 firemen shown in picture. The truck is a Republic, equipped with a 40-gallon chemical tank, 200 feet of chemical hose, 1,200 feet of 2.5-inch water hose, a 24-foot aerial ladder, and a 12-foot roof ladder. All calls in South Park and north as far as Grizzle Street are answered by the station. Yes, they were very proud of their equipment in 1921, just like we are of ours today. We've come a long ways. But who's to say 100 years from now they'll look back on our equipment and say, oh, is that what they used to fight fires with? And that's what you call progress, folks. Join me in my next video and we'll see what there is to see.